A faint blue light from the phone screen highlighted the deep wrinkles etched into Eleanor's face. She sat on the old wooden chair in a living room so quiet only the steady ticking of the clock could be heard. One hand trembled as it held the phone, her eyes wide, her lips pressed tightly together. On the screen, a family photo posted on Facebook was clearly visible, but what made her feel like she was suffocating was the bright red circle drawn right around her face. The caption above, written by her very own daughter-in-law, Vanessa. If you had to delete one person from this family, who would you choose? Eleanor couldn't believe her eyes. She blinked, thinking it must be a clumsy joke, a harmless meme. But right below, a flood of comments appeared like a filthy storm. Easy. Get rid of the old lady. What else? Honestly, she doesn't look like she fits in with anyone. Lowell, this old woman must be so annoying. Along with them were laughing emojis, rolling on the floor laughing emojis, and fingers pointing down in mockery. Each comment was a knife, stabbing deep into the 68-year-old woman's self-esteem. Eleanor felt the blood in her veins run cold, her heart heavy, as if someone was squeezing it. She leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting blankly to the ceiling. Never in her life, not even when she bid her final goodbye to Arthur, had she felt so exposed, so publicly humiliated. Not by society, not by strangers, but by her own family, her own loved ones. A moment later, Eleanor lightly tapped on the comment section. Her finger trembled, but in her chest, a flame of indignation had ignited. She wrote, "That house is mine, and the one being deleted will not be me." Just one sentence, but her entire world had shifted. The room fell silent. Eleanor put the phone down on the table, listening to her own ragged breathing. In the dim light, her eyes flashed with determination, but in the end, they welled up with tears. Memories flooded back like an old film reel. An afternoon 12 years ago, Arthur was still alive, both of them standing in front of this small, warm house. They held hands, signed the purchase papers, their eyes shining with the belief that this would be a sanctuary for their family. Arthur had said, "It has to be in your name, Eleanor. If anything happens, you can protect Michael. Marriage is a tricky thing. Our son needs a safety net." At the time, Eleanor just smiled, thinking it was her husband being overly cautious. She never imagined that one day, that very decision would become the only weapon to protect her from betrayal. The phone vibrated violently, pulling Eleanor from her memories. The caller was Sophie, her niece. "Grandma, did you see Facebook?" Sophie's voice was anxious. Eleanor took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yes, I saw it. I'm sorry. Vanessa did that on purpose, Grandma. She wanted to humiliate you." Eleanor was silent. A silence so heavy that it made Sophie choke on her words. After a few seconds, Eleanor replied softly, "I know, but maybe she forgot one thing. This house is not hers." That night, Eleanor didn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the pale yellow streetlights cast onto the empty street. In her mind, the venomous comments still echoed, as if the whole world was laughing at her. But at the same time, she also saw Arthur. He was standing beside her, quiet as always, placing an imaginary hand on her shoulder. "Don't let them take what's yours. This house is our sweat and blood. It's yours." Eleanor clenched her hands. She realized it was time for her to stand up. She had been silent for too long, letting her son and daughter-in-law twist the narrative, turning everything into their accomplishment. while she was just an invisible outsider. No, enough. The next morning, Eleanor called Michael. His voice was clearly annoyed. "I don't understand why you have to make such a fuss. It was just a joke." "A joke?" Eleanor tried to stay calm. "You think publicly humiliating me for the world to see is a joke? You're overreacting. Vanessa just wanted to have a little fun. And you shouldn't have said that about the house. Everyone knows you and Dad only helped with a part of it. The rest was built by my wife and me." Eleanor felt the blood rush to her face. "Michael, listen closely. This house is in my name. Mine alone. If I want to, you two might have to leave." The other end of the line was silent for a moment. Then Michael's voice turned cold. "Don't push it, Mom. I don't want to fight you. But if you force my hand, I'm not sure." The call ended. Eleanor sat stunned, her heart feeling like it was shattering. Her son, the son she and Arthur had sacrificed their whole lives to support, was now putting his wife above his own mother. Not only that, he dared to threaten her. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, but when she opened them, the desperation was gone. Only resolve remained. That night, Eleanor opened her computer, searching for a lawyer's contact information. Her finger stopped at a familiar name. James Wilson, Arthur's old friend, once the family lawyer. She dialed the number, letting the phone ring long into the night. When James's voice came on, deep and professional, Eleanor said softly, "I need help. This isn't a family matter anymore. This is war." The house sat at the end of a small street, surrounded by a white picket fence, its paint faded by time. To an outsider, it was just an ordinary house. 3 bedrooms, a living room, and a backyard big enough for a few flower bushes. But to Eleanor, this place was her heart, her memories, the legacy of a lifetime spent with Arthur. In the morning, she walked down the hallway, her hand lightly touching each photo on the wall. The wedding photo, now yellowed. Arthur in a gray suit, Eleanor in a simple white dress, both looking at each other with radiant smiles. Next to it, a photo of Michael at 8 years old, holding a baseball trophy. The frames were silent witnesses to a time when the family was still whole. Eleanor sat down in the old armchair, closing her eyes, and the memories rushed back like a slow-motion film. 12 years ago. An autumn afternoon, the sky a stretch of pale orange, a cool breeze blowing through the trees. Arthur held a stack of papers, his eyes shining like a young man just married. "Look, Eleanor," he said, his voice trembling with happiness. "We can finally help Michael start his own life. He'll have a foundation, a roof over his head. No more struggling with rent." Eleanor stood beside him, looking at the 2-story cream-colored house. It wasn't luxurious, but it was solid, warm, enough for a small family. She felt joy welling up inside, mixed with a little anxiety. "Are you sure it should just be in my name? I still think maybe we should put it in both their names. That way they'd feel more comfortable." Arthur shook his head, his hand gripping her shoulder firmly. "No. Things can change, Eleanor. I believe Vanessa loves Michael, but marriage, no one can predict. If something unfortunate happens, Michael needs to be protected. Your name will be his shield. Trust me." His gaze was so sincere that Eleanor stopped protesting. She nodded, signing the paper. From that moment, the house became her sole property, a seemingly small decision, but one that would shape the family's destiny. On moving day, Eleanor and Arthur bustled about, helping the young couple. Michael, then just 30, excitedly carried in box after box. Vanessa smiled sweetly, thanking them profusely. In the kitchen, Eleanor arranged each plate, each pot. She carefully laid out a tablecloth, as if wanting to infuse it with her invisible care. At first, everything seemed fine. Michael and Vanessa paid Eleanor a symbolic rent each month. Eleanor never demanded it, only thinking her son needed to learn to be independent. She and Arthur often visited, bringing baked goods, flowers from the backyard, or simply to see if the two were okay. Then Arthur passed away. One winter morning, as snow blanketed the roof, he collapsed from a sudden heart attack. Eleanor stood by his hospital bed, her cold hands grasping her husband's. In that moment, her world fell apart. In the following days, the house became a place Eleanor visited more often. She wanted to feel close to Michael, to her grandchild. She wanted to fill the void Arthur had left. And in a moment of weakness, she decided to stop collecting rent. "This is the last gift from your father," she whispered to Michael. Michael had hugged her tightly, saying how grateful he was. Vanessa also had tears in her eyes, calling her Mom. But time can fade gratitude. Eleanor opened her eyes, looking around the room as it was now. On the coffee table, a few utility bills lay scattered. She remembered the times she heard Vanessa telling friends, "We've owned our house for 12 years now," her voice full of pride. Eleanor had stayed silent. She thought, well, as long as my son is happy, that's enough. The truth sometimes doesn't need to be exposed, but that very silence became a knife that turned back on her. Now, the whole world thought Eleanor was just a freeloader, living off the charity of her son in the house he bought himself. A noise in the garden startled Eleanor. She walked to the window and saw Vanessa trimming the flower bushes. The young woman stood there, confident, as if this was her territory. Eleanor suddenly felt a lump in her throat. This house, this garden, had been the sweat and tears of her and Arthur. But now, she was like an outsider, with only the right to watch from a distance. She closed her eyes, hearing Arthur's voice in her memory again. "It has to be in your name, Eleanor. It must." That advice suddenly became a stark reality, like a premonition. And in that moment, Eleanor felt Arthur was still here, watching, urging her to stand up. That night, Eleanor opened her old file of documents. The house purchase contracts, receipts, a copy of Arthur's will. The black and white text was clear. The sole legal owner was Eleanor Grace Pierce. She organized everything, placing it all in a neat folder. Sitting at the desk under the yellow light, Eleanor whispered as if speaking to Arthur, "Don't you worry. I won't let them turn our hard work into a joke. I will take back everything, both my honor and the truth." In the afternoon, sunlight streamed into the kitchen, filtering through the dust-streaked window pane. Eleanor stood by the dining table, her hand gripping the folder of documents. She had texted Michael to come over for a serious talk. Inside her, the stress that had been building for days swirled like a storm. A car stopped in the driveway. Michael walked in, tall, his hair already streaked with some gray. He wore his familiar cologne, but his eyes no longer held the warmth of his childhood. Behind him, Vanessa glided in, her face a challenging smile, as if this was a meeting she had already won. Eleanor sat down, motioning for them to sit as well. Michael crossed his arms, his voice cold. "If you have something to say, Mom, say it quickly. I have a lot to do." Eleanor looked directly into her son's eyes. eyes that had once been her pride. Michael, I read what Vanessa posted. You think that was a joke? Did you see the hundreds of people mocking me? Michael frowned, sighing. Mom, you're really being too sensitive. It's social media. Everyone knows it's just for laughs. Vanessa just wanted to have some fun. You don't need to take it to heart. Eleanor clenched her hands, her voice dropping low. Fun? Do you know what they said? They wanted to delete me from the family. And you didn't defend me at all. You stayed silent and let your wife humiliate me publicly. A tense silence. Vanessa smirked, but said nothing. Michael leaned on the table, his voice hardening. You're blowing this out of proportion. Honestly, I think what you said about the house was the inappropriate part. Everyone thinks this is our house. You can't just randomly declare it's yours. Those words were like a cold stab. Eleanor felt her heart constrict. She opened the folder, slapping it down on the table. The papers fanned out, stamps and signatures still intact. Here is the paperwork. This house, legally, is mine. Not yours. Not Vanessa's. I kept silent for 12 years because I thought family was more important than the truth. But today, I will not be silent anymore. Michael looked down at the papers, then looked up, his eyes flickering with hesitation. But immediately, he took a breath. His voice strained. So what if it's legal? You think Vanessa and I have no rights after living here for over 10 years? We invested money to renovate, to maintain. We turned this place into our home. And you just held on to the papers. Eleanor looked at her son, feeling as if she were facing a stranger. Michael, your father bought this house with his life savings. He put it in my name to protect you. Have you forgotten? Have you forgotten who gave you this start? Forgotten who sheltered you when you had nothing? Her voice cracked, but her eyes still burned bright. Michael avoided her gaze. He turned to Vanessa, seeking agreement. She nodded slightly, as if giving him strength. He turned back, his voice icy. Mom, I respect you, but I can't let you ruin our lives. If you keep insisting, then we'll have to take this further. I don't want to, but you're forcing me. The words hit her like a lightning strike. Eleanor trembled, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Take this further? What do you mean, Michael? Michael stood up, his shadow stretching across the tiled floor. I mean, if you don't stop, we'll get the law involved. I don't want to fight you, but don't think we don't have any rights. Eleanor sat frozen, as if turned to stone. Her son, the little boy who used to cling to her skirt, now looked at her like an opponent. Behind him, Vanessa smirked faintly, a look of triumph in her eyes. A heavy silence filled the kitchen. Eleanor took a deep breath, then slowly stood up. Fine. If you want the law, then the law will answer. But remember this, Michael. I am not afraid. I have already lost my husband, lost my respect. I have nothing left to lose. As for you, are you so sure you'll get to keep everything? Michael paused for a second, but then turned and walked to the door. Before leaving, he tossed back a cold remark. I hope you think carefully before this goes too far. The door slammed shut. Eleanor stood alone in the empty kitchen, the folder still open on the table. She placed her hand on the documents, feeling a sharp pain in her heart, but also a strange new strength. Outside the window, the sky darkened, storm clouds gathering. Eleanor understood that from now on, she had not only lost the warmth of her son, but would also have to face him in a battle she had never imagined. The next morning, Eleanor put on her gray wool cardigan, clutching the folder in her hand as she left the house. The sky was a dull gray, the clouds churning as if signaling a storm. She walked with heavy steps on the damp pavement, her mind in turmoil, but her eyes bright with determination. Her son had chosen to turn his back, to side with his heartless wife, and that meant Eleanor had no path of retreat. She had to seek justice. The glass door of James Wilson's law office opened to reveal a tidy, quiet space. The smell of old wood mixed with the faint aroma of coffee. Behind a desk piled high with files, a man with graying hair looked up. His eyes, behind silver-rimmed glasses, lit up with surprise and warmth. "Eleanor, it's been so many years. I never thought we'd meet again under these circumstances." The familiar voice made Eleanor pause for a second. James Wilson, Arthur's old friend, once their family's legal counsel. Eleanor sat down in the leather-upholstered chair, her hands still trembling in her lap. "James," she said softly, her voice low and hoarse, "I need help. This isn't a family matter anymore. This is war. And I can't afford to lose." He listened, his expression calm, as Eleanor poured everything out. From the social media post, the red circle on her face, to the cruel comments that shamed her. From Michael's cold silence to the bitter confrontation last night, where the son who was once her pride had looked at her like an adversary. With each word, Eleanor's voice trembled, but it grew steadier, as if the humiliation itself had forged steel within her. Finally, she placed the folder of documents on the table, pushing it toward James. "This is the proof. The house belongs to me, but they've lived there for 12 years. Do I still have a chance to get it back?" James turned each page, his eyes lingering on the stamps and signatures faded with time. He pushed his glasses up his nose, nodding. "The paperwork is perfectly legal. You are the sole owner. By law, since Michael and Vanessa paid no rent and have no lease, they are not considered tenants. Legally, they are just occupants. And occupants can be asked to leave with a 30-day notice." A spark ignited in Eleanor's eyes. She couldn't believe her ears. The house, the legacy she and Arthur had preserved together, could actually be hers again. But James wasn't finished. He leaned back slowly, his voice heavy. "There's something else, Eleanor. Before he passed, Arthur set up a trust fund for Michael, worth $400,000, and you are the trustee." Eleanor was stunned. For a moment, her heart seized. $400,000? Arthur never told me. James nodded slightly. He probably wanted to keep it private to avoid conflict. But the truth is, Michael is not in financial trouble. It's ambition that's driving their actions. Eleanor bowed her head, tears welling up. In her heart, the image of Arthur returned, his gentle smile, and his undying belief that family was the most important thing. And now, the legacy he left behind was being used by his own son against her. James closed the folder, his eyes sharp but empathetic. "Eleanor, you have two options. One, you continue to stay silent, give in, and accept their narrative that you are just a freeloader. Two, you stand up and send them a notice to vacate. I will represent you. But remember, once you choose the second path, there is no turning back." In that moment, the room became utterly still. Eleanor could hear the wind whistling outside the window, like a distant urging. She remembered the red circle on the photo, the mocking smile of Vanessa, the strange, cold eyes of Michael. And then she remembered Arthur, his warm voice from long ago. "Your name will protect our son. It must." Eleanor lifted her head, her eyes shining with resolve. James, I choose the second path. It's time they learned I am not so easily deleted. James nodded, holding out his hand. Their handshake was firm, not just a legal agreement, but an oath. He spoke softly, but clearly. All right, we will fight. But prepare yourself, Eleanor. I have a feeling this is more than just a property dispute. Vanessa is not a simple woman. If she dared to humiliate you publicly, there must be other secrets behind the scenes. Eleanor nodded curtly, her voice hardening. I've lost my husband. I've lost the respect of my own son. I have nothing left to lose. If I have to, I will uncover everything. They will have nowhere left to hide. She left the office, the wind whipping her gray hair. In her hand, the first legal notice, a small piece of paper with the weight of a lifetime, trembled in the breeze. Eleanor paused on the steps, looking up at the gloomy sky. In the dim light, her face was clearly defined. Lines of hardship, eyes still shadowed with sadness, but deep within them, a fire burned that would not be easily extinguished. From this moment, the family feud had become a legal battle, and Eleanor, the woman who seemed so frail, had officially stepped into the final fight of her life. Night fell. Eleanor's room was lit only by the faint yellow glow of a desk lamp, casting her shadow onto the floor. After meeting with James, she felt she had a weapon in her hands. But she also knew this was just the beginning. The legal proof of ownership gave her solid ground, but her intuition told her Vanessa would not give up easily. Eleanor took a breath, opening a wooden drawer to organize her papers. Amidst a jumble of bills, her eyes landed on a strange stack of papers. Credit card statements. The name printed on them was clear: Eleanor G. Pierce. She frowned. She had never used this card. Since Arthur's death, she'd been careful to use only her debit card for expenses. So why was this here? Her hands trembling, she opened each page. The charges were listed clearly. $100 to $200 at a high-end fashion boutique, $600 at a luxury seafood restaurant downtown, $3,500 for online furniture, and dozens of other small charges, cosmetics, plane tickets, hotels. Total, over $8,000. Eleanor froze, her mind reeling. This couldn't be a mistake. Every word, every number hit her eyes like a fresh stab. The only person who could have done this was Vanessa. The next day, Eleanor met Sophie, her close niece, at a small cafe downtown. Sophie sat down, her youthful face tight with stress. "Grandma, you found out, didn't you?" Sophie asked, blinking rapidly. "Found out what?" Eleanor tilted her head. Sophie bit her lip, then nodded slightly. "The credit card. I knew Aunt Vanessa was using it. She got your information from old files. I once heard her bragging to a friend that old people never check their statements. I wanted to tell you for so long, but I was afraid of causing trouble." Eleanor sighed, leaning back in her chair. Her heart ached, not just for the money, but for the blatant deceit. "Sophie, you know, humiliating me online wasn't enough. Now they're treating me like a bottomless wallet." Sophie took her hand, her voice firm. "Grandma, Vanessa doesn't just want to humiliate you. She has a plan to get rid of you completely. I heard her on the phone once. She wants to prove to everyone that you're a burden, that you should get out of the house. The Facebook post was just the first step." Eleanor felt choked up. In her mind, the image of Vanessa, the sweet smile, the syrupy voice from years ago, now morphed into a venomous snake, slithering through her family. That evening, Eleanor sat in the living room, staring at the statement. Every number, every charge was an accusation. Arthur had once taught her, money isn't just numbers, it's a trail. It shows who is honest and who is deceitful. Now these numbers exposed Vanessa's true face. She picked up the phone and dialed James Wilson. His voice came on, low but firm. Eleanor explained everything. On the other end, James was quiet for a moment, then said, "Eleanor, this is significant evidence. It's not just misappropriation of property. It could be identity theft. If you want, I can have a forensic accountant review all your financial accounts. I'm afraid this is just the tip of the iceberg." Eleanor nodded, her voice resolute. "Do it, James. I'm not afraid anymore. If they want to eliminate me, I will expose everything." The next day, James came to Eleanor's house with a financial expert. They sat in the living room, spreading the statements out on the table. The expert typed seriously on his laptop, his eyes lighting up with each new discovery. "Mrs. Pierce," he said, "we've done a preliminary check. There are at least 3 credit card accounts that were opened using your personal information. Vanessa is behind all of them. The cumulative debt is over $8,000, the amount you saw. But there's more. We found she is keeping detailed records of your financial habits. There's even a recording of a call to customer service used to authenticate your voice." A chill went down Eleanor's spine. She was spying on me?" "Yes," James replied. "This is no longer a family dispute, Eleanor. This is financial crime, and you need to prepare for a much bigger fight." When the expert left, Eleanor sat with James. Her eyes were fiery, no longer weary. "James, I have lost enough. They took my dignity. They took my son. They took my money and my name. But I swear, this time, I will take it all back. Whether I have to face them in court, whether I have to step into the darkness, I will not back down." James looked at her, nodding slowly. "Good. Your integrity is your strongest weapon. But remember, Vanessa is not naive. You've poked a hornet's nest. It will strike back." Eleanor smiled bitterly. "Let it try. I've endured enough. Now, it's their turn." Eleanor's small house was submerged in the gloomy afternoon. She sat by the window, the cold gray light falling on her wrinkled hands, which were clenched around a cold cup of tea. Since discovering Vanessa had used her identity to open credit cards, she hadn't slept peacefully for a single night. But that pain was not the end. It was just the prelude to a larger storm that was approaching. The phone rang. James's voice was grave. "Eleanor, I just received word. Michael has officially filed a lawsuit claiming ownership of the house based on adverse possession." In that instant, she felt the floor tilt beneath her. "Adverse possession?" she repeated, her lips trembling. James explained, slowly and clearly. "It's a law that allows a person to claim ownership of a property if they have occupied and used it openly, continuously, and without dispute for a certain period. But in this state, that period is 20 years. Michael and Vanessa have only been there for 12. Their lawsuit has no legal basis." Eleanor let out a dry, bitter laugh. "No basis. But they still dared to file. It means they are ready to fight me." James sighed. "They aren't just fighting, Eleanor. They want to drag you through the mud, exhaust you, and force you to give up." The next day, Michael appeared at Eleanor's house, but not to reconcile. He carried a thick envelope, slamming it down on the table. "Here is a copy of the lawsuit," Michael said, his voice sharp. "You can't just think everything belongs to you. Vanessa and I have lived there for over 10 years. We've renovated it. We've made it ours." The court will have to consider that. Eleanor looked at her son. His eyes held nothing of the little boy who used to run in the garden. Before her was a stranger, his eyes cold and proud. "Michael," she said softly, her voice catching, "do you really want to make me your enemy?" He avoided her gaze, but his voice didn't soften. "I just want what's fair. Your so-called ownership is just a piece of paper. We turned that house into a home. If you can use the law, so can we." Eleanor picked up the envelope, opening it. The cold pages fell onto the table, the sound of paper hitting wood as sharp as a declaration of war. She looked at her son, her voice trembling, but her eyes bright as fire. "Do you no longer remember who bought that house, who paid every penny? Do you no longer remember your father signing his name to protect you? Do you no longer remember the meals I brought over, the rent I never collected?" Michael faltered for a moment, but then he clenched his fists and turned away. "Don't bring up the past. The past can't change the present." The door slammed shut behind him, leaving Eleanor alone in the empty room. That night, Eleanor called James again. She recounted everything, her voice a mix of pain and anger. After listening, James's voice deepened like distant thunder. "Eleanor, from now on, this is no longer a family argument. This is a legal battle. They've hired a prestigious law firm, I just checked. It certainly wasn't cheap. Their source of funds is highly suspicious. It might be connected to the accounts you discovered." Eleanor gripped the receiver, her eyes darkening. "I'm prepared, James. If they think they can push me out of my house with this dirty trick, they are mistaken. I will fight to the end." The next day, news of the lawsuit began to leak. Neighbors whispered, old friends called to ask. Some felt sorry for Eleanor. Others sided with Michael and Vanessa, thinking, "They're young, they deserve to own the house." The gossip made her feel like she was being torn to pieces. But in the midst of this storm of opinion, Eleanor stood tall. She spent the entire evening reviewing every document, every signature, every bank statement that James and the accountant had found. They all formed an unshakable wall of evidence. She looked at the old photo on the wall. Arthur smiling, his hand on her shoulder. Eleanor whispered softly, "Do you see, Arthur? Our son has chosen the side of darkness, but I will not surrender. I will protect what we built with all the strength I have left." On that autumn evening, Eleanor's house was submerged in the faint yellow light of the lamps. After the flood of news about Michael's lawsuit, she felt as if every breath was heavier. But in that silence, she was not alone. Her nephew, Leo, her sister's son, had quietly taken her side from the beginning. And it was his curiosity, mixed with a little youthful stubbornness, that opened the door to the darkest secrets. Leo was a computer science student. Ever since he heard his Aunt Eleanor's story about the exploited credit cards, he decided to investigate on his own. "Grandma, we have ways of tracking digital footprints. Aunt Vanessa thinks she's smart, but she left a lot of holes," he said, his eyes glinting with resolve. At first, Eleanor hesitated. She didn't want to drag her nephew into this dark vortex, but Leo was insistent. "If we don't shed light on this, they will continue to harm you. I can't just stand by." For the next few nights, Leo was glued to his laptop. His room was constantly lit by a blue glow, lines of code scrolling, data windows popping up. Eleanor often stood outside his door, watching, worried but proud. The skinny boy she remembered was now a young man with sharp determination and intellect. And then, after 3 sleepless nights, Leo brought her a small USB drive. "You need to see this," he said, his voice low, a stark contrast to his usual cheerful self. In the living room, Leo plugged the USB into the TV. Files appeared one by one. A folder named Eleanor Project. Inside were dozens of files with detailed notes, bank account numbers, old email passwords, copies of ID, all belonging to Eleanor. Audio recordings, Eleanor's voice, clear as day. They were calls to bank customer service, where she was verifying her information. Leo explained, "Vanessa recorded you, then used voice cloning tech to bypass the verification systems. This is how she opened more credit cards in your name. A financial spreadsheet, listing every loan, every transaction. More terrifying, many documents were in the name of a shell company, Apex Holdings, LLC. Leo pointed to a line of data. They used this company to borrow over $230,000, using your house as collateral without your knowledge." Eleanor sat in silence, her hands clutching her head. Each piece of evidence was a new stab. She thought Vanessa's public humiliation was the worst of it, but it turned out that was just a smokescreen for a much more sophisticated conspiracy. Leo continued, his voice steady but filled with anger. "Grandma, that's not all. I also found that Vanessa logged into multiple online accounts using your name. This is large-scale identity fraud. She wasn't just stealing money. She wanted to control your entire legal and financial profile. If she succeeded, you would lose everything and even be framed for the debts she created." Eleanor looked up, her eyes brimming with tears. "Leo, are you sure? All of this? Is it real?" "The evidence is undeniable, Grandma. And I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. Vanessa doesn't just want money. She wants to eliminate you completely, socially, legally, and financially." A long silence filled the room. Eleanor could hear the clock ticking and her own heavy heartbeat. She remembered the early days when Vanessa first joined the family. A charming girl with a radiant smile, calling her mom so sweetly. Arthur used to say, "Michael is so lucky to have such a wonderful daughter-in-law." Who knew that after more than a dozen years, the truth would reveal a completely different face? Eleanor tremblingly placed her hand on Leo's shoulder. "Thank you, my dear. Without you, I would never have known how deeply I was betrayed." Leo held her hand tightly. "Grandma, don't worry. I won't let them destroy you. We will expose everything." That night, Eleanor called James, asking him to come over. As the files appeared on the large screen, James's face grew more serious than ever. He was no longer the calm, collected lawyer, but a general preparing for a life-or-death battle. "Eleanor," he said, his voice decisive, "this is the golden ticket. Identity fraud, financial theft, bank fraud. All of this could send Vanessa to prison for many years. As for Michael, if he was complicit, he won't escape responsibility." Eleanor sat still, looking down at her veined hands. Her heart ached, but it was also cold as ice. "Michael, my son. How much did he know?" James shook his head slowly. "We can't be sure, but sooner or later, the evidence will reveal the truth." When James left, Eleanor sat alone by the window. Outside, a hazy moon hung in the sky, illuminating the garden that Vanessa had turned into her territory. Eleanor whispered softly, as if to Arthur somewhere far away. "Do you see? We raised a snake in our house. It didn't just want to bite me. It wanted to bite the very legacy you left behind. But this time, I won't let it win." Eleanor's living room was quiet, save for the rhythmic tapping of a pencil on the notebook of the man sitting opposite her. It was Peter Grant, a forensic accountant James had brought in. His eyes were sharp, his hands turning over each document Leo had provided, occasionally typing on his laptop to compare data. Eleanor sat beside him, her heart pounding. She knew this moment would unveil another dark part of the truth, but she still wasn't ready for what she was about to hear. Peter cleared his throat, then looked directly at Eleanor. "Mrs. Pierce, after analyzing the financial records and the data Leo found, I discovered that Michael and Vanessa established a company called Apex Holdings, LLC. On paper, it's a property management company. In reality, it's just a shell, a phantom company with no real business operations." He turned his laptop screen. Eleanor saw rows of spreadsheets, endless numbers. Peter pointed to one line. "This is the first loan, $80,000, signed under the name of Apex. They used your house as collateral." "What?" Eleanor's voice choked. "But how could they—" "The house is still in my name," James interjected, his voice steady. "They forged the documents. Vanessa likely used the financial information you inadvertently exposed, combined with bank fraud schemes, and the bank was fooled." Peter continued. "It didn't stop there. Within 3 years, Apex LLC took out a total of 4 loans. The current total, $230,000. Of that, $50,000 was used to hire an expensive law firm, likely the one currently representing Michael and Vanessa. Another $180,000 was used to buy a vacation condo in Florida. The rest was for personal expenses, travel, designer goods, parties." Eleanor felt as if all the air had been sucked from her lungs. She gripped the arms of her chair, a wave of nausea rising in her. "My God! They used my house to borrow money, to live lavishly, while I thought I was still their mother." Peter typed a few more keys, displaying another document. "There's one more critical detail. They withdrew $40,000 from Michael's trust fund. They used the power of attorney Michael was granted to make medical decisions for you, then spun it into a temporary financial power of attorney. This way, they transferred the money out without your signature." Eleanor shuddered. Arthur had left that fund for his son as a safety net for the future. But Michael and his wife had turned it into a tool to fleece her. James crossed his arms, his face tense. "With this evidence, we are no longer talking about a family conflict. This is bank fraud, elder abuse, and legal forgery. If we take this to court, they will face many years in prison." A heavy silence filled the room. Eleanor sat still, tears rolling down her cheeks. But they were not tears of weakness, but of fury. She remembered every time Vanessa had told her friends, "We pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps. This house is our achievement." She had been silent, had given in, had believed that family was more important than the truth. But now the truth was exposed, and it was so brutal it nearly crushed her heart. Leo sat beside her, his fists clenched. "Grandma, I know it's hard to believe, but this is when you have to use the truth against them. If you don't, they will continue to destroy you." Eleanor looked up, quickly wiping away a tear. Her eyes shone with a steely resolve. "No, they have taken too much. I will not let Arthur be dishonored, nor will I let our life's work be turned into a scam. James, Peter, get ready. I want all of it brought to light." James nodded slowly, his voice as firm as a judge's gavel. "Then we will begin the proceedings. But remember, Eleanor, once this card is played, there is no turning back. This will be a fatal blow to Michael and Vanessa. and a turning point in your life. Eleanor looked out the window. The sky was completely dark, with only a lonely moon shining through the black clouds. She closed her eyes softly, whispering, "Arthur, please watch over me. I will not let you be ashamed of me. This time, I will fight to the end." Eleanor's living room was brightly lit by the desk lamp shining down on a thick pile of files. Papers, spreadsheets, and bank statements lay scattered like pieces of a dark puzzle. Across from her sat James and Peter, their eyes heavy with the gravity of the situation. Leo sat beside them, clutching his laptop, his eyes unable to hide his fury. Eleanor sat up straight, her hands clasped in her lap. She was no longer trembling as she had in the beginning. Instead, her eyes were cold and hard. She was ready to hear the rest of what she needed to know, no matter how bitter the truth. Peter opened a new file, typed a few lines, and then turned his laptop screen toward them. A chart appeared, a tangled web of arrows and numbers. He spoke slowly, each word seeming to drop onto the wooden floor. The trust fund Arthur left for Michael was worth $400,000. That money was supposed to be managed carefully, spent only on legitimate purposes. But upon inspection, we discovered that $40,000 has been illegally withdrawn over the past 2 years. Eleanor leaned toward the screen, her eyes glued to the text. How? Peter turned to another set of papers. Michael was granted medical power of attorney for you, meaning if you were unable to make your own decisions, he could sign documents on your behalf. Vanessa exploited that, forging it into a temporary financial power of attorney. They used it as a tool to withdraw money from the fund. Eleanor froze. Her voice trembled, catching in her throat. Arthur left that fund for Michael, to protect him, and now he's using that very money to fight me. James nodded, his voice low. This is a form of trust abuse. Legally, it's a crime. If this goes to court, Michael cannot escape responsibility, even if Vanessa was the instigator. Leo cut in, his voice sharp with anger. Grandma, I also found evidence that Vanessa created a detailed spreadsheet tracking the expenses from the fund. She calculated every dollar, from the money paid to the lawyers to their luxury vacations. They weren't careless. This was planned from the start. He pulled up an Excel file. The rows of text appeared. Law firm retainer, $15,000. Vacation condo deposit, $20,000. Medical proxy fee, $5,000. Eleanor stared at the numbers, her heart aching. They turned the fund Arthur left to protect his son into a weapon to betray me. How ironic. James placed his hand on the table, his voice firm. Eleanor, I have to be honest. At this stage, Michael is no longer a victim manipulated by his wife. He is an accomplice. Without Michael's signature, these transactions could not have happened. He knew. He chose to stay silent and even participate. Eleanor turned away, her eyes blurred with tears. Memories flooded back. Michael, at 10 years old, running to the door when she came home from work, hugging her as if she were his whole world. Then the image of the lanky young man at his graduation, she and Arthur cheering his name from the audience. And now, that same son was signing papers to steal assets, to turn his back on his own mother. She whispered, as if to herself, Michael, how could you? Peter cleared his throat softly, pulling everyone back to the present. What's important is that we have all the evidence. The withdrawal slips, the forged power of attorney, and the spreadsheet Vanessa created. These things are irrefutable. With this, we can charge them with financial fraud and abuse of trust." Leo slammed his hand on the table. "Grandma, we have to bring this to light. We can't let them get away with stealing everything Grandpa worked for." James looked at Eleanor, his gaze both stern and concerned. "But the decision is yours. You can use this evidence as leverage to force them to stop all their schemes, return the house, refund the money. Or you can press criminal charges, take them to court. But that path will be a brutal fight. It could destroy Michael completely." Eleanor sat in silence. She felt the conflict raging in her heart. On one side was indignation, a thirst for justice, and the need to protect the honor she and Arthur had built. On the other was a mother's love. Even if her child had betrayed her, a part of her still wanted to protect him. Finally, she looked up. Her eyes were red, but her voice rang out like a blade cutting through the silence. "No, I will not be silent anymore. Arthur would not forgive me if I let them trample on justice. If Michael has chosen the side of darkness, then I will drag him into the light. The son I once knew is gone. All that's left is an accomplice. And I will not be afraid of him." James nodded. "Good. We will prepare the file. But be ready, Eleanor. After tonight, there is no turning back from this war." Night fell. After everyone had left, Eleanor sat alone. On the table, the file on the trust fund was still open, the number 40,000 shining bright red like a blood stain on the paper. She reached out and touched the photo of Arthur on the shelf. He was smiling gently, his eyes bright as if he were still watching over her. "Oh, my love," she whispered, "I'm sorry. I let them betray your trust. But I promise I will get it all back. Not just for me, but for you." Outside, the autumn wind howled through the trees, carrying a biting chill. But inside the room, Eleanor's eyes burned. It was no longer the fear of a betrayed mother, but the resolve of a warrior stepping into her final battle. The house was silent. On the living room table, all the papers, statements, and files that James, Peter, and Leo had collected were stacked in neat piles. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, the lamplight casting shadows on her face, highlighting wrinkles that looked like battle lines etched over the years. She was no longer the mother trembling at betrayal. Now, she was the one holding the flame of justice, and she was ready to use it to burn down every lie. That afternoon, Eleanor called Michael. Her voice was calm but decisive. "You and Vanessa will come see me tonight. We need to talk one last time. If you refuse, I will let my lawyer and the police do the talking." The line was silent for a moment. Then Michael replied, his voice tense. "Fine. But remember, Mom, I'm not backing down." When the clock struck 8, a car stopped at the gate. Eleanor stood up, her heart pounding but her gaze steady. The door opened. Michael entered first, his face strained. Behind him, Vanessa strode in, arms crossed, a mocking smile on her lips. "Just say what you want to say," Michael said curtly. Eleanor pointed to the table. "Sit. The truth is in front of you. Documents, statements, audio recordings. All the evidence my lawyer and I have gathered. Look closely, because after today, there will be no more chances to deny it." Vanessa glanced at the papers and laughed dismissively. "Oh, God, more theatrics. You think you can scare us with these papers? We have good lawyers, Eleanor. You can't do anything." Eleanor didn't reply. She opened each file, pushing them toward them. The laptop screen next to her lit up, displaying the spreadsheet Peter had analyzed. Her voice rang out, slow and sharp as a knife. Here's the $230,000 loan in the name of Apex Holdings LLC. Here's the proof that you used my house as collateral. Here are the statements for the $40,000 withdrawn from the trust fund your father left, using the medical power of attorney Michael was granted. And this, she pointed to the screen, is the file of Vanessa recording my voice to fraudulently open credit cards. Michael's face went pale as he scrambled through the papers. Vanessa tried to maintain her composure, but her hands were clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. Eleanor stood up, her voice ringing out. You have committed bank fraud, identity theft, abuse of trust, and elder abuse. If I take all this to court, you will lose not only this house, but your freedom. Vanessa will likely go to prison. And Michael, you won't escape either. Michael looked up, his eyes wavering. Mom, are you really going to do that? I'm your son. My son? Eleanor stared at him. My son is gone, Michael. The person sitting here is just an accomplice to deceit, betrayal, and greed. You chose the side of darkness, and I will not forgive that. Eleanor took a deep breath, then presented the final piece of paper. This is your choice. 1. Repay all the stolen money, including the $230,000 loan and the $40,000 from the trust fund. 2. Sell the condo in Florida immediately and use the money to pay off the bank debt. 3. Leave this house within 3 weeks and do not return. 4. Dissolve Apex Holdings and sign a binding agreement to reverse all fraudulent transactions. If you do all 4 of these things, I will not file criminal charges. The living room was dead silent. Only the ticking of the clock could be heard, each tick like a hammer blow on frayed nerves. Vanessa jumped up, shouting, You have no right to make us do this! This is our house! This is our life! Eleanor stepped closer, looking her daughter-in-law straight in the eye, her voice low and hard as steel. No, this is my house, and this is your last chance to escape a prison cell. Choose wisely. Michael hung his head, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked at the papers again, at the irrefutable evidence. His voice trembled. Vanessa, we can't fight this. She has everything. Vanessa turned to him, her face pale, her lips pressed tight. A flicker of the fear she had hidden for so long flashed in her eyes. Eleanor returned to her seat, picking up her cold teacup, her voice calm. You have 24 hours to answer. If not, my lawyer will send the file to the district attorney tomorrow morning. She didn't look at them again. The sound of chairs scraping, then the slam of the front door. The house was silent once more, but this time, Eleanor didn't feel alone. She felt Arthur beside her, like an invisible warmth resting on her shoulder. Eleanor's house returned to its usual quiet, but the atmosphere inside her was different. After the ultimatum, she knew Michael and Vanessa were facing a crossroads. On one side was compromise. Return everything, leave the house, accept the humiliation. On the other was confrontation. Drag it out in court, potentially lose everything, and even lose their freedom. Eleanor sat in the living room all night, listening to the autumn wind howl in the garden. The thick pile of files was still on the table, the yellow light shining on the cold words. She closed her eyes, picturing the look in Michael's trembling eyes, and Vanessa, frozen in the fear of exposure. She knew that in the next 24 hours, their lives, and hers, would take a decisive turn. In another part of the city, in the house Michael and Vanessa called home, the air was scorching. Vanessa threw the papers onto the table, her voice shrill. No way! Who does she think she is, kicking us out? Everything we have is here. If we listen to her, we'll have nothing left." Michael paced back and forth, clutching his head. His confidence from when he filed the lawsuit was gone. Now, the evidence Eleanor presented was starkly clear in his mind, like an unflattering mirror. He growled, "Vanessa, you don't get it. Mom has all the documents, the loans, the trust fund, the credit cards. There's no way to deny it. If she takes us to court, we will lose. And not just the house. You could go to jail." Vanessa spun around, her eyes blazing. "What are you saying, Michael? You're giving up. After everything we've done, you want to surrender." Michael looked at his wife, his eyes bloodshot. "We have no other choice. She gave us an option, and this option is merciful. Do you know how severe the sentence will be if the police get involved?" Vanessa was silent for a moment. In her eyes, pride and fear waged war. They both lay in bed, but neither slept. Michael stared at the ceiling, remembering his childhood, a little boy holding his mother's hand on a cold winter night, listening to Eleanor read stories by the fireplace. He wondered how he could have gotten to this point, becoming an adversary to the woman who gave him life. Vanessa lay with her back to him, tears soaking her pillow. She didn't exactly regret what she'd done, but fear consumed her. The image of a prison, of cold steel bars, of long days stripped of freedom. It all became terrifyingly real. In the darkness, their ragged breaths mingled, and they both knew that tomorrow would decide everything. The next morning, Michael drove to his mother's house alone. When he walked into the living room, he saw Eleanor sitting there, calm as ever, her eyes bright. He no longer recognized the weak mother who used to avoid conflict. Before him was a strong woman, ready for a fight. "Mom?" Michael's voice was hoarse. I'm sorry." Eleanor looked at her son, saying nothing. She let him speak, like a man cornered. "I was wrong. I let Vanessa drag me down this path, but you have to understand. I just wanted to protect my family. I was afraid of losing everything, afraid of being seen as a failure." Eleanor replied, her voice calm but sharp. "Michael, you didn't lose because you were poor. You lost because you let greed and fear lead you. Your father left that fund to protect you, but you turned it into a weapon against your own mother. What am I supposed to believe?" Michael bowed his head, tears falling. "Mom, I accept your terms. I'll convince Vanessa." That evening, Michael and Vanessa returned together. Vanessa walked in, her face pale, dark circles under her eyes. Her usual arrogance was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. Eleanor was waiting, the agreement drafted by James on the table. She didn't say much, just pushed the paper toward them. "Read it. Sign if you agree. After that, we are done here." Vanessa picked up the pen, her hand shaking. She looked at Michael with desperation, but then she signed. The ink bled onto the paper, each stroke like the snap of a dry twig. Michael followed, signing his name beside hers. When they both put their pens down, Eleanor collected the paper, folding it neatly. She sighed, but it wasn't a sigh of relief. It was the sigh of someone who had completed a painful journey. Eleanor looked at her son, her voice softer but still firm. "Michael, I used to think a mother's love could overcome anything, but today I understand some wounds can never heal. You chose your path, and the price you pay is my trust. But I still hope you learn this lesson. Justice never sleeps." Michael kept his head down, unable to look her in the eye. Vanessa was silent, her shoulders slumped, her eyes vacant. As they left the house, Eleanor stood by the window and watched them go. The car disappeared into the night, leaving an empty street. She returned to the living room. The pile of files was still there, proof of a battle she had won, but also proof of the price of betrayal. Eleanor knew that from now on, she was no longer the long-suffering mother. She was a woman who had walked through hell and emerged, holding the flame of justice. In the days after the agreement was signed, Eleanor's house returned to its quiet state, but the atmosphere was entirely different. She no longer felt besieged, no longer feared a stab in the back. For the first time in years, Eleanor truly felt she had taken back control of her life. 3 weeks later, the vacation condo in Florida, the symbol of luxury Michael and Vanessa had flaunted, was put up for sale. Eleanor didn't go, but James sent her the report from the realtor. The condo has been sold for $180,000. The entire amount has been used to pay off the bank loan and remove the lien on the house. Eleanor sat in her living room, holding the report, slowly reading every line. The lavish place her son and daughter-in-law had seen as proof of their success was now just a means to repay debt. She closed her eyes and sighed. Justice didn't need a sword. It only needed the truth. Peter, the forensic accountant, brought more good news. All 4 loans under Apex Holdings LLC have been paid in full. The fraudulent loan file is closed, and the Apex company is officially dissolved. Eleanor heard the news, her heart feeling both light and bitter. The image of her daughter-in-law flippantly signing loan papers, a smug smile on her face, flashed back like an old movie. But now, that entire facade had crumbled. James sat across from her, his voice steady. Eleanor, they thought they could build an empire on greed and lies. But the law has a longer memory than people do. Though it may be slow, justice always arrives. She nodded slightly. Thank you, James. Without you and Peter, I could not have made it to this day. On the day Michael and Vanessa moved out, it was drizzling. A moving truck was parked at the gate, boxes being loaded quickly. Eleanor stood by the window, watching in silence. She didn't go out to see them off, didn't say a word. Michael kept his head down, stumbling as he walked, as if every box he lifted was a piece of his dignity dropping. Vanessa couldn't hide her bitterness, her eyes flashing a look of hatred toward the window where Eleanor stood. But she didn't care anymore. When the truck pulled away, Eleanor let out a long breath. The house, her and Arthur's legacy, was finally quiet. A few weeks later, Peter brought one last piece of news. The $40,000 illegally withdrawn has been returned to the trust fund. The balance now matches the original $400,000 that Arthur left. Eleanor held the statement, a strange emotion welling up. It wasn't just about the money. It was proof that Arthur hadn't been completely betrayed. She touched the paper, whispering, Arthur, I finally protected the gift you left for our son. Even if he no longer deserves it, at least the truth is intact. The story spread through the community. The same people who had witnessed Eleanor's public shaming online now sent her words of encouragement. You are so resilient, one person wrote. Justice has been served, commented another. Sophie came to her, hugging her tightly. Grandma, I'm so proud of you. You taught me that sometimes silence is wise, but other times you have to stand up and speak the truth. You made the right choice. Eleanor smiled, her eyes softening. Thank you, Sophie. Without you and Leo, I would never have made it to this day. One winter morning, Eleanor opened the window, taking a deep breath. The fresh air rushed in, carrying the scent of the roses she had planted in the garden. She brewed a pot of tea and sat at the breakfast table. There were no more files, no more documents, just a book she had been meaning to read for a long time. She felt as if the house had been cleansed of all its gloom, leaving only the memory of Arthur, warm and enduring. Eleanor smiled softly. "Finally," she whispered, "peace has returned." Eleanor sat alone at the wooden table, the morning light streaming through the window, illuminating her face with serenity. In that house, the laughter of the past was gone, but in its place was a deep, profound peace. A woman who had been publicly shamed, who had been betrayed by her own son, now sat there, not a victim, but a quiet victor. The morning light stretched across the small garden. Dewdrops clung to the rose petals, glittering like tiny jewels. Eleanor sat by the window, lifting a steaming cup of tea. This was the first morning in many months that she felt complete tranquility. No more worries about lawsuits, no more arguments echoing through the house. Only the sound of birdsong and her own steady heartbeat. As the story of Eleanor's battle spread, the community began to see her in a new light. Those who had silently read the humiliating post online now reached out, leaving messages of sympathy. In Eleanor's email inbox, dozens of messages appeared. "I was once in a similar situation with my daughter-in-law. Thank you for standing up. You are an inspiration. Justice may be slow, but it never sleeps. We trust and admire you." Sophie printed some of the messages, placing them in front of her. Eleanor read them, her eyes filling with tears. She had never thought her private battle could touch the hearts of so many strangers. "See, Grandma?" Sophie said, her voice full of pride. "People support you. You are not alone." Eleanor smiled, placing her hand gently on her niece's. Perhaps this is the greatest reward of all. The next day, Leo came to visit. The young man's eyes were bright as he placed a small box on the table. Inside was a new tablet. "Grandma, this is for you. I've pre-installed all the apps you'll need. You can read books, make video calls, even write an online journal. And I've blocked all of Vanessa's old accounts she used to monitor you. You're safe now." Eleanor laughed, a rare, light-hearted sound. She picked up the tablet, swiping the screen, feeling as if she had stepped into a new world, one where she was no longer a victim, but in control. Leo teased her with a grin. "Who knows? Maybe you'll become an inspiring social media star." Eleanor shook her head, but deep inside, a quiet joy was bubbling up. That night, Eleanor sat at the wooden desk, opening an old leather-bound journal. She took a pen and began to write a long letter to Arthur, a habit she'd kept since he passed. "My love, I finally saved our home. What you left for our son, I protected it to the very end, even though the cost was losing a son. I know that breaks your heart, but you also know that justice is more important than deceit. They have paid the price, and I have found peace. I still miss you every day. But now, the grief is no longer a burden. It is the light that guides me forward." Eleanor put the pen down, taking a deep breath. In that moment, she felt Arthur right there, smiling, nodding. Sophie and Leo suggested Eleanor join an online support group for seniors who had experienced financial abuse. At first, she was hesitant, but after a few days, she decided to try. When Eleanor shared her story, hundreds of comments flooded in, words of thanks, tears of empathy. Many said they had suffered in silence, but because of her, They found courage. For the first time in many years, Eleanor no longer saw herself as just a mother, a lonely old widow. She had become a symbol of resilience, of the belief that justice still exists. One morning, Eleanor stepped into the garden. Bright golden sunlight spilled over the rose bushes. She cut a single stem, placing it in a glass vase on the dining table. In the morning light, the petals unfurled, as red as a heart still full of life. Eleanor sat down, sipping her tea. She felt peace spread through her with every breath. All the pain, the betrayal, the fierce legal battles, they were now just the past. In her heart, a message echoed, a message she wanted to send to everyone, and also to herself. It is never too late to stand up for the truth. It is never too late to find yourself again. And every dawn, no matter how dark the night, still brings a new beginning. Eleanor sat in the bright kitchen, the red rose vibrant in its vase, the morning sun flooding the room. Her face glowed with a serene smile. The story closed not with a loud victory, but with peace, the most deserving reward for a woman who had walked through hell and found her way back to the light. Months passed. Winter gave way to spring, and Eleanor's garden was once again vibrant with flowers. She no longer wrote to Arthur in loneliness. Instead, she started a blog, sharing her life experiences and lessons in resilience. The online support group she joined became an important part of her new life. Occasionally, she heard news of Michael and Vanessa through Sophie. They had moved to another state, living in a cramped rental apartment, struggling to pay off their remaining personal debts. Michael worked 2 jobs, and Vanessa had lost all of her former arrogance. Eleanor felt no satisfaction, only a simple reminder that greed always has its price. She looked out at her garden, sipping her tea. Her life, at nearly 70, was truly just beginning.